we should be able to get everything. Hey, this is Benjamin Weaver. Currently it is April 15th, 2018, and
How long was it after the movie?
After the movie?
After when it released?
It came out March 29th. So I actually did see this movie long beforehand. I saw it in IMAX 3D. But I wanted to see it again and with someone, because I'm not good at doing these videos by myself. I'm much better when I'm playing off other people. And I wanted to watch this movie again because, honestly, I didn't know what to feel about it. My first time watching it, it was, there were different stages of how I felt when I was doing it. At first, when it introduced everything and it was just kind of throwing all this stuff out of there, I was kind of uninterested because it didn't really feel as though it was really that great as far as character development. It just kind of throws you into the situation and just like, here's a virtual reality. And we've seen that in a lot of different things.
Yeah.
I mean, it was done well, and it's like, you know what, the references that they threw out, I was expecting that they would have a lot of references, that it would be kind of pretentious.
Oh, believe me, they had lots of references.
And I love myself some references, but yeah, it didn't feel like it was pretentious, like, hey, we know this stuff. It just felt like, you know what, it was knowledgeable, it served its purpose. So, okay, I wasn't really that interested. And then the Shining sequence happened. And then I was like, what is this? They really go into the Overlook Hotel.
Oh, yeah. It's Steven Spielberg paying homage to Stanley Kubrick.
Yeah, like, it's the second time since, like, AI. But
no, I'm sure he's done it multiple times.
Probably. It might have.
But this is the most overt.
Most overt. Like, yeah, no, it was just great. It was like, they basically just walked back in time to 1980, and we're in the Overlook Hotel. They recreated it so well, and
they did have to have a character go through the antics. It was like,
yeah,
I've never been through The Shining. So naturally, he's the guy who falls through all the traps and scares.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. But like, right there, I was just like, this by itself is a great concept. If there's a virtual world where you go into these different movie worlds, almost like it's Sonic Generations, but it's like...
Yeah, I was happy that they took a break from games and then actually went to movies. Because it's like, there's more to the video game than just games.
Yeah. No, it's supposed to be a collection of popular culture over the years, particularly at the end of the 20th century. But, okay, that happens, and then I started to like the characters a bit more. Like, even before the Shining sequence, like when we actually see Wade and Samantha meet in real life, I really liked that scene where they're playing off each other. It was just like, it felt very human.
I think they should have done her makeup better.
Oh, the birthmark?
Birthmark? That's a birthmark? Look more like a bird scar. Well, I think I think it was attempted to look like a bird scar.
It was better than Dev Patel's scar in The Last Airbender, okay?
If it was a birthmark, it'd be like better, but I mean, like, it's a
birthmark.
It's that kind of...
That's the idea. That's the idea. It's a birthmark.
Yeah, okay.
You might have missed that bit of dialogue.
Yeah. I think they meant it to be, oh, this makes me look horrible, and I'm thinking, but it's a birthmark.
I get the idea.
It looks fine.
I get the idea that
makes you look cool.
I get the idea that in the book it was she would probably looked a bit different.
Yeah.
But because that she's played by Olivia Cooke, she's naturally gorgeous, so it just seems like what's to be disappointed with. Okay, we'll get to stuff like that later. Okay, so it goes on, and then by the end of the movie, like with the climax, it's very... Yeah, I got the idea about what they were trying to accomplish. For better or for worse, it felt like this movie really knew where it was going and what it wanted to do. And by the end of my first viewing, I was just like... I didn't like it first, but then it's like there's bits and pieces, so I was kind of unsure. And so it was the sort of thing where, like, I didn't know if I really enjoyed it that much, but I certainly would recommend it for other people who might be curious about it. It's like, maybe they could like it. And it is cool to see this type of high-concept Steven Spielberg movie that we haven't seen in a long time. And so I saw it again, and I liked it a lot better the second time. It's like... I was much more familiar with these people.
So,
and
I wanted to come with Benjamin for his second time. Because, firstly, I didn't want to see the movie initially. I saw the trailers, was not interested at all because I hate the concept of a fantasy world you can escape to. I love fantasy, but the concept of escapism was not something I was appealed to. Then I did some research, saw some videos of people and that made me less interested.
So you're saying that you're much more interested in a fantasy in a story where they're actually in it, not where.
No, not that. It's not escapism that's the problem. It's the saying that escapism is the answer. And I did some research on the book. Not a lot. I didn't spoil myself too much. And
I've heard a lot of negative things about the book.
Basically told me that, yeah, the book is not the kind of book I want to read. For one, the main character isn't very good. It's not that the main character isn't good. He does some things that are, well, let's just say controversial with some audiences. Not in the movie.
But you know what? The audiobook is done by Will Wheaton.
Well, I know that.
You know that? Oh, okay.
I also know that Will Wheaton is a character within the book.
He is?
Yes. So, yeah, I know a whole bunch of other things, including that the book is a lot more post-apocalyptic. It's about that the world has run out of fossil fuels.
Okay.
The movie, the world has run out of corn syrup.
Yeah, there was a corn syrup famine.
And then they also mentioned the bandwidth wars.
I don't know if they ran out of corn syrup, but there was like a famine of sorts.
Yeah, so something that made it post-apocalyptic, but not dystopic post-apocalyptic.
Dystopian? You mean?
Yeah, it's not dystopian. Thank you.
Yeah.
And
it borders on it, I guess.
It borders enough so that you say, yeah, there's a reality to come back to. So, the Oasis is a place to escape to, but it's not a place to substitute reality.
One of the things
I at least appreciated that very much throughout the film. I'm glad that Steven Spielberg got that right and changed that much from the book. Granted, I haven't actually read the book because it's really not my cup of tea.
And I'm not really big on reading books either. I need to work on that.
Saw some reviews, spoiled myself just a little bit, not too much, but they basically told me that the movie follows the first 15 minutes of the book and then completely diverges. Like, not completely, but the challenges are vastly different. There's no D&D session.
There's a D&D session?
Yeah. Well, firstly, I'm not going to go off to Ranger, but I know that the challenges are different from the book. And the more important thing I was curious is, okay, so if they change things from the book, how do they handle the message? The message that made me so concerned about the book. And sure enough, they changed it.
They changed the message?
Yeah. The movie is better in that book. Better than the book, if only because it's Steven Spielberg. It's the way he would have ended things, not the way that whoever wrote the book was.
The message in the movie is very basic about how important reality is.
Yes.
It's the only place you can get a decent meal.
I thought that disabling the Oasis every Tuesday and Thursday was a little on the nose.
I get it.
What are you, Chick-fil-A?
What? No, I got it. I was fine with that. It was at the end of the movie, and I was like, you know what? Yeah, makes sense.
And from that day forward, Wednesday was a holy day, for it was isolated amongst the 2 empty days.
Taco Tuesday has a new meaning.
So, when I watched the film, I actually liked the characters
from the start.
I also watched the film from the start. Yeah, from the start.
It took me a while.
It did take you a while because they kind of forget to ground you in that reality. I'll talk about some of the problems, but I want to talk about some of the things they did very well, which is they showed a world that looks interesting to live in. They show, actually, most of the film that I enjoyed the most was outside Oasis. The stacks, IOI, which was the evil corporation building, the chasing in the bus, that one moment in the end where he does a roundhouse kick using the stunt wires. I thought that using stunt wires in the end to simulate motion reality was really cool. I thought they should have focused way more on that during the film, but it was a nice fun thing at the end. Let's see. One of the things I was concerned about was, is this going to be so reference heavy that you have to get the references to follow what's going on? You don't.
Not really.
To an extent.
Certainly.
You can understand what an Easter egg is without ever playing games, movies, or anything else like that.
There are Easter eggs in lots of things other than video games. There are Easter eggs on DVDs. That's I think that's the way how I first heard about the concept of that.
Yeah, so you do have to have some reference for that, but you know, it's movies.
Yeah.
What's the first time you ever heard of an Easter egg in Do you know what my first Easter egg was?
Well, it's on a DVD. I'm trying to think of which one. Which one was it? Because we have very similar experiences.
The very first Easter egg I ever saw was on a DVD for Toy Story 2.
Oh. I think it was on Monsters Incorporated.
That was the second one we ever saw. And that was when they distinctly told us this is an Easter egg. Congratulations, you found the Easter egg.
I don't remember seeing the DVD of Toy Story 2.
Nope.
Like, because we never owned it. We always had it on VHS.
One of our babysitters had the DVD, and we watched it, and he showed us directly where the Easter egg was, and we laughed at one of the funniest scenes.
Which scene was that?
It was Jesse's owner driving away,
right?
And then suddenly going haywire.
Oh yes,
that was the first Easter egg I ever saw.
Yeah.
So aside from that, everything else was followable. But here's the funny thing: I understood pretty much every reference.
Yeah.
At a certain point, I actually intentionally blurred out because I'm just not going to care about all the references. I know that if I was pausing the film, I could pick out that reference, that reference. I knew what adventure was. I knew about the classics. I almost thought that when they said Sword Quest, they were going to talk about the missing fourth Sword Quest. Because they mentioned briefly that they were looking through all the NES classics, and they said, I'm sorry, not NES, what was it? Atari 2600 classics.
Yeah.
And they mentioned 3 Sword Quests. And I just kept on thinking to myself, how do you beat that? How do you die in Sword Quest? Do you know what Sword Quest is?
If I did see it, I forgot. What is it?
I just want to dwell on this because because this is like many plot holes in the film, not in terms of story structure or plot, but in terms of how the reality should work. And I kept answering myself, how does that work? How does that work? How does that work? Okay,
you'd have questions about that.
I had to turn it to end. And when I get to Sword Quest, I thought for sure they were going to talk about the 4th missing Sword Quest, but Sword Quest is a game series created in the 1980s, right before the video game crash of
83.
Mm-hmm. And what it was that they, rather than just being another video game, it was a puzzle. So the first Sword Quest, there was a whole championship competition where people would play Sword Quest, the game, and the first prize winner would win an item. And then there would be the second game. So the first game was called, I believe, Earth? Yeah, the first game was Earth. And then the second game was Fire. Oh. And then the winner of Earth would win a certain item. And then the player of Earth would win the game once they figured out the clues and win the second item. And then by the time the third game came out, Water, it was when video games during that time were declining.
Now I remember what you're talking about with Sword Quest.
And they lost so much money, they had to cancel the whole competition and never release the 4th one. So they'll never find out the 4 champions who all came together for one last game to win the ultimate prize. But I diverge. I digress.
Not diverge, I like that phrase.
No, so that's what I thought. I kept thinking to myself, but it's a puzzle game. You don't lose it, you just go through the thing like it was like a flipbook manual. That's the game.
So it's
not really a game, it's just a puzzle.
Was this at the end when they were playing through all the different games?
Yeah, they were playing through the game. Okay, sorry. Diverging from how do you die in a game that's just a puzzle game? Like, the reason why...
No, here's what it is. The problem with that was that all the different Atari games that they tried out, they could only play it for a minute, and then at that point they dropped through the ice.
Okay,
and then once they got to Adventure, that's the one where it actually worked past a minute.
Okay,
and then
that makes sense.
They thought, okay, you need to win that, and then that's... the person who found Adventure, he didn't end up... His avatar didn't end up getting destroyed.
Who puts an Atari 2600 in a war world?
In a glacier?
In a war world. That's what it was. It was It was Planet Doom.
It's symbolic. It's a final boss thing, but it's not what you expect.
Anyway, maybe that would have been way too obscure a reference, whereas the Adventure made more sense because they could explain that reference more easily. Most people would get it, and more importantly, the film was able to keep itself well contained. Even if you have no idea what the reference is. You don't know who Iron Giant is? It's okay. It's a giant robot. You don't know who Gundam is?
Yeah.
Sure. Just a giant robot that shows up. Mechagodzilla?
Yeah.
You know, everything... You don't need references, and all the important stuff didn't really even use a reference.
So I've liked references using references to popular culture, obscure things ever since Yu-Gi-Oh! Abridged. It was one of those things that... what we like about Yu-Gi-Oh! Abridged is that the way that it uses references, it's very funny, and many times you don't even know what he's talking about.
Right.
And it's a case where like the reference should be done where like even if you don't know what it is they're referencing, you get the context of like why it's being used, and it makes you interested in looking it up later on or finding it out later on. So.
Right. So when they were flipping through references, I'm like, I know it deep down. Like, I know that one. I know that one. I know that one. I know that one. I was more. Whenever they showed me a reference, I kept thinking, okay, if you took out that reference, would you get it? And I'm like, yeah, you would. Yeah, you would. King Kong. Well, it's a giant. King Kong at the end of a puzzle.
Giant gorilla.
Just a giant thing that stops you from winning.
It's
as best as possible. And at best, it rummages from homage to sometimes it's a joke.
Yeah.
So they handled the references very well. They created an interesting world. The plot was not particularly interesting because it was just a bad guy who's trying to take over the world, literally the Oasis world.
That was one of the things
it's just generic. Although I gotta say, funniest thing about the movie, the thing that made me laugh the most was the bad guy, Soretto.
Ben Mendelsohn.
Soretto is trying to convince the main character Wade that he's on his side, and to do so he's trying to say a whole bunch of references, but every time he says a reference it's coming out of the mouth of a businessman who has zero.
It was from the loyalty group. He has Bluetooth that's connected to them.
I know. You have you have his nerd team shouting references so that he can try to convince
Fast
them.
Times at Ridgemont High wasn't written by John Hughes.
And just the most ridiculous things. But when it comes out of the mouth of a person who has no idea what he's talking about, it sounds like garbage, and it was funny.
I love that I'm with both Parsifal and Soretto. Like, they were using things to kind of like...
Parsifal being the main character, Wade.
Well, yeah. Yeah. I like that at first, like, he does this motion suppressing sort of thing in order so he can catch a breath because he's freaking out. And then, like, Soretto notices that immediately. And then when Soretto is getting information from the loyalty group, Parsifal knows that he's getting it from that. So it's like, I kind of like that bit.
So I think in terms of being a good film, I think it's perfectly serviceable.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of fun things inside it. And I'd say I like the film with a catch. And this is the thing that's going to make or break the film for you. I don't think this film is really hateable at all. I don't think there's anything offensive this film does or anything that was poorly done.
The worst that can happen is that you may end up getting bored.
The trouble with the film is if you're not into the adventure as it's happening before your eyes, like the virtual reality adventure,
mm-hmm.
you're basically just sitting in a seat watching something play in front of you. You're not experiencing it. You're not having fun with it. When the first challenge, the race was happening, I was just like, it's very happening.
It's very chaotic.
I wasn't at all interested until he grabbed the girl who was he grabbed the girl.
Artemis.
Yeah. Until that point when they finally pulled back characters, I was just like,
another thing that threw me off like with that was that it's one of those cases where it's like it's a one-shot type of thing that's going through the race, but there's so much going on that it's hard to process, and it's like that's what threw me off. I don't know. I was able to focus much more the second time and just kind of enjoy it.
It's not stuff happening. I've seen movies where you throw tons and stuff and it gets chaotic and crowded. And So one of the key things would be like in Beauty and the Beast, the live-action remake, Be Our Guest is so cluttered. I don't think it's possible to enjoy it, even if you could stomach the music sung by Ewan
McGregor. But it's funny, like that scene from Beauty and the Beast remake, it's made me like realize one positive from the original that I would have never thought of, or that I would have never like come to the conclusion of is
negative space.
The importance of having things not happen at certain parts of the screen or at certain times. You know, there's a lot of the background is like either black or kind of like the teal wallpaper or paint or whatever, and so it's so that you can focus on what is happening. And with the remake, it's like it's just a whole bunch of things happening, and there's too much to process. But yeah,
but that's a criticism for another video. I don't think this film had this problem. No, rather, what the film had a problem was the film jumps right in. It does no problem explaining the world, explaining the characters, explaining the motivation, explaining what everybody is going after. Even if I still don't fully understand why they're called Sixers. Seriously, they're called Sixers because they just give them numbers.
They might have.
That's all they gave me to understand what a Sixer is. The Sixers are the people who are hired by the organization to hunt and participate in the challenges to win the keys.
And the way that the narration kind of went in, how it was just way too basic, because who are you really going to explain the Oasis to in this world? Everybody kind of knows what it is, so they had to do narration. Yeah, and so he was it seemed very blatant, like, oh, here's the stuff. Here's Soretto. He's a douchebag, so you're supposed to hate him and stuff. And it's like, that was one thing that threw me off my first viewing. It's just sort of, come on. But it's like, I'll let it slide.
You didn't need somebody to explain it or even experience it for the first time. In fact, I don't think it needed to do that. I needed to them just explaining a world and then living in it was perfectly fine.
Okay.
That wasn't the problem. It was just, I wasn't absorbed early on. Nothing clicked for me.
Yeah.
So when stuff begins to happen, the death race, effectively, I'm just a passive viewer.
Exactly.
I'm not particularly invested in the world. I keep wondering more questions about what's happening in the real world. You keep wondering, wait, if you need a trackpad, like the movable, flexible trackpad in order to walk in this world, how is everybody doing this?
How are some people sitting down when doing this? I mean,
how are people... I'm just
I get the idea. I get like how there's different ways that you can enter the Oasis. Sometimes you can just do it very casually, and sometimes like there are some people who get special suits where you can actually feel things. Some of them have wires.
That's its own problem.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of
questions,
flaws in this film that I call plot holes, but are really just world holes in terms of how the world is constructed. Those brought me out of the movie constantly because I kept asking myself, for every reference I got, there was always something that went, wait a minute, what's the logistics? Shoot, where are the data miners? Where are my flipping data miners? I mean, like, you're telling me that you live in a virtual world with headsets and everybody can interface, and that each of these interfaces can digitally put you inside this world from any connection, from any point in the world, because all it needs is to scan your eye. All it needs to do is scan your eye, and your avatar and all of your proceedings, all of your money is inside the game. Okay, you have that.
You just need a good Wi-Fi.
And then they forget to ask some other important questions, like how you move around in this world. Now, like, for example, this movie was made...
There's an omnidirectional...
This movie itself was made
treadmill
during a point where virtual reality, where, you know, the digital headsets for HTC Vive and the PlayStation... what's the word? What's the PlayStation one for it? Okay, wait. The point is that when you put it on, you don't always move around if you don't have a joystick. But you can still walk around in a specific box-like room, and
with a control pad.
And you can teleport from place to place to place to place. Or you can get inside a vehicle that moves you around the virtual reality. Like, there's lots of different things, and I kept wondering to myself, if you don't have this incredible trackpad, how do you move around? Now, the movie got creative in some regards. Like, for example, I love the part where they're suspended in air and moving around.
Yeah.
I wish they really cut to a scene where they were just, like, jogging.
Yeah.
It's like, wouldn't it be harder to maneuver in a reality where you couldn't feel the floor? I mean, that was the whole point of the suits. The suits was its own problem.
Made more sense than Spy Kids 3, let's just say. This is a better movie than Spy Kids 3.
And I have its own problem with suits that can sense reality. And it was
basically the G Gundam suits.
Yeah. I keep thinking to myself, so you invented a suit that can give pain?
Yeah.
Like, sure, put sensors, give minor feeling in your thing, because tactile information is really important. But pain should be something sharp, you know, that's like I felt it and I don't want to do it, but it's like nothing, or nothing like, oh, my crotch.
It's sort of a contraction. That's the way how the suit works. Like,
yeah,
it's
what? Okay.
it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah, I know, but it brought me out of the movie because I kept questioning how the world works. I needed somebody a character who existed as a data miner. A data miner to just spout off information that was maybe relevant to the characters, but subtly tells you how the world works in a funny way.
Okay.
Make him the joke character, not the comic relief character. Make him for exposition, but exposition in that funny kind of way where the characters don't even realize that they're saying exposition, but the audience might have a chance of catching it.
Usually it was like all the characters talking amongst each other that kind of gives the exposition for how certain things work.
Right. But that and many other questions of how the world functions that I could go into and say either not realistic or not fantastical enough. It's the Inception problem all over again, where the guy says to Arthur, "Don't be afraid to use your imagination," and then proceeds to just pull out a bigger gun. And I'm like, you're in a dream world. You could do anything.
Yeah, that was his disappointment with Inception, was that they didn't do
I loved Inception.
They didn't do any fantasy things, and that really bothered him.
To an extent, because
I
love the structure of the film, and I would not have made it a fantasy film to ruin the kind of structure, because I still love the story of Inception.
I think you would kind of like Dreamscape. It's a 1984 movie with Dennis Quaid that has the same kind of concept.
But I want to finish thoughts on the movie. And this is the thing. I like the characters. I get the references. I like the story. I certainly like the moral. Not so much the plot, but the plot is in service to explain this world. The problem is, I was not absorbed in this world. Not sure why. Were you absorbed into this world?
I like the ideas that are capable of presenting, but it feels as the sort of thing where, like, I want to see another, like, story that takes place.
Because it wasn't the ending or the middle part that was not particularly interesting. Like you said, once they went to the Overlook Hotel, you're like, wow, this is amazing.
This is a very focused concept that this shows. Like, the Oasis, when it starts off, it's very broad. There's all these different things that you can do. But for me, it was when it focused down on just one simple thing. You go into the world of a movie. That was the point where I was just like, right here,
cool.
Like, that could be its own movie. I want to see some other things. I want to see them go into, like, I don't know. Pick the most popular movie of any year.
Oh yeah, it's also the live action Beauty and the Beast problem, where they throw in all these fantasy elements. Each one could be focused in on themselves.
So when they're using, like, the soundtrack to The Shining, it was just like, it's so cool.
Now, I haven't seen all The Shining, but I know enough about it.
You know enough. You know some of the most iconic sequences.
I know about it. I've seen video essays on it. I've seen everything short of actually watching the film.
So at least you know the look of the movie.
Oh yeah, I know the tone. I know the backstory.
Yeah.
Like, and I know enough to say to get the reference that Stephen King, who wrote The Shining, was not pleased with his work.
Wait, a little.
It's like it was more like Stanley Kubrick's work.
Well, yeah, it was.
Yeah, it's like. But anyway, that's an obscure thing. But I want to talk to you about that one singular problem that the film has, because if that film engaged me more, I said I love this film. I said, yeah, I kind of like this film at this point, really.
Yeah, sure.
I kind of like it. That's my state of this film. Perfectly serviceable.
I think you'd like it a little better if you saw it.
I like it a little better if they fixed a few elements, but if they had really absorbed me in the world, I'd have loved it.
What was your one problem?
My one problem was I was not into the world. I was not into the world of Oasis. I knew it was a world that exists. I understand why the characters want to participate in it, but me, the audience member, was not interested in the world itself.
So it just felt like another virtual reality in a movie.
And there's a few reason why. And it's a subtle thing, and it's within the first 5 minutes that they mess up the film, and those first 5 minutes condemn the rest of the film to being okay. And here's what they did in the first 5 minutes. The exposition was fine.
Okay.
Explaining the world was fine. I even thought the concept of the corn syrup shortages and the bandwidth war and the corn syrup famine and the bandwidth wars was both apocalyptic and kind of a funny idea. It's like,
you got to make some events that happen.
That's fun. That's fun. I was not a problem with that. Not the exposition, not the way the characters were introduced. the way the world was introduced.
There's
What do you remember in the first 5 minutes of the film? Because that's what before we end the video, I want to focus on. That's the first 5 minutes of the film.
First 5 minutes.
What do you remember?
When you first start
From
off,
the character's introduction, entering the world, to the start of the race.
You show him going out of his room in the stacks. He climbs down. You see the different people.
Okay.
You see like them
introduced
using
to this world.
The equipment.
Yeah, understand this world.
Like that they're doing these things in this world. You're just seeing the headsets. You see him go into his trailer at the bottom and go into the world. When you go in,
his own special room, smashed together between cars, his own special trackpad, and the things he pulls together. Okay,
and then he goes
enter into the world.
Then then that's when he gives the exposition to the audience about how there's different planets.
No problem there.
Yeah,
there you go. You stumbled at the first problem.
Planets.
They jump from one world to the next. Jump.
You see a Minecraft world. You see a bingo world. You see a casino place.
Yep.
You see a vacation planet.
Yep.
And then
there's some jokes in there. There's some exposition in there. But eventually we get to the main plot, and then we start the story.
So your problem was that it was too big from the start.
Yep.
Ah.
Do you see that the problem is?
Yeah, certainly.
The film was so eager to show you all this world had to invite you in that it actually pulled me right out.
You need to do one bit at a time to really get you invested in it.
Starting with you could still do the same exposition, same written dialogue, but the visuals had to be different to invest you in the world. And those first 5 minutes of pulling you into the world, you don't get those, you are basically waiting for a hook. That is the problem. That is a thing in any movie where if you're not into it within the first 5 minutes, if you're not understanding what the premise is, you're not understanding what you're getting into, you are an audience member waiting for a hook. And no matter how good the film is or how well constructed, and the film wasn't perfectly constructed, but there was definitely a lot of entertainment. If you're just sitting there waiting for the hook, wondering, okay, when do I start enjoying it? It's not going to be a great film.
Yeah.
Maybe a good film, not a great one. And her hook, for example, was the Overlook Hotel.
Yeah. So
because the concepts there are fascinating.
So here's a very basic example of like how to get you invested in a world. Something like the Legend of Zelda games. Take, for example, Ocarina of Time. You first start off in the Kokiri Forest. And for me, that was like one of the first big like video game experiences was, we played Super Mario 64, but then when I played this, it wasn't something where you were just jumping around and cartoony. It felt like it was a world. You were
right.
I was fascinated with just looking around with this, and then you find out slowly that the world is even bigger. You go into Hyrule Field, that's big enough. That kind of shows, that's a visual that shows like how much bigger that the game is. Not literally that there's stuff in Hyrule, but just like what is yet to come. And little by little, you see what else there is.
And you think discover more races.
And then like
you discover more.
You think that you're just going to be as a kid, but then you realize you go into the adult world, and then it becomes bigger in this world that you've already gone through. And there's even more to it.
Fundamental concept of video games. You start small, get big. When you launch into the world and you're throwing stuff at their face to wow the audience, I'm an audience member waiting for a hook. And the hook may come, or the hook may never come. But the point is that you've lost a good percent of my investment for this film. And I'm just sort of watching stuff happen.
Yeah.
References or none.
I was a bit concerned that the movie was going to, before I saw it, I was concerned that it was not really going to get video games very well. Much like how Spy Kids 3, it's all about video games, but it has no idea how video games work. This movie, it's like, it did, like, okay, it had, to a certain extent, it had a grasp of like certain aspects of it. But yeah, and that would actually been really nice, having a nice soft way to introduce it. Maybe a flashback.
Not a character. You don't need a. Here's the thing, and here's the thing I thought about those first 5 minutes. You don't need a character going, "Wow, I've never been to this world. Let me. I want to see how this works." And you just start fumbling.
You don't need a whimsical digest. You don't need a whimsical digestion type of moment.
Yeah, you don't need this, and I'm glad that the film didn't do that.
Considering it's a Spielberg movie, yeah.
No, you didn't need. And it's not like they poorly introduced the world.
No.
Nothing about the world was fun. I mean, there are flaws in the way the world is constructed, but in the way they introduce the world and the way you understand the world, no, I understood it. I understood that well enough. This is an interesting case where this isn't a problem with script or world construction.
World building.
But in world introduction.
Ah, there you go.
So, let's talk about another film for comparison that does world building and the world introduction well. Zootopia.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do they start the film?
They started off with backgrounds about where animals used to be.
Yeah. It's exposition in a funny way. So there's nothing new. You have to dump exposition.
So he's in a play.
But
you're in Bunnyburrow. That's where.
But then after that type,
Judy is from. Yeah.
Mm-hmm, they introduce that, but then they go into characters. They very subtly, without even hinting of what the rest of the film is going to be about, what the theme is, and you see Judy, who wants to be a police officer,
mm-hmm.
getting bullied by the predator, and the other kids calling them a predator.
Mm-hmm.
So subtly, very smallly, you are invested in this one character as she is climbing in this world. And the rest of the thing is slowly one thing after another, telling you more about the world until suddenly you get into that train sequence. The train sequence. By that point, the film had built itself up to a point so that when the train sequence plays the great music and shows the entire city, bam, 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 in one whole full spell swoop, you are invested. You want to know more about the city, and you're fascinated. The film has a similar moment. The race is the moment when it's just throwing stuff in your face. That was not a problem. You may not like clutter, but that's not the problem.
Had it built up to it better.
Had it built up to that better, when he steps in the car and you feel yourself in the DeLorean, then that would have changed the perspective of the rest of the film.
Okay.
So, here's what I would have done. He puts on the goggles, and there's a subtle joke. Exposition is still going on. There's a subtle joke where he realizes, oh shoot, I parked my avatar in a rather awkward place. Oh, let me get out of this place. I need to get to the next race again. Something like that. Like every time you exit the Oasis, you leave your character behind, and the character just disappears. And then when you come back, in theory, come back to the same place. It's not.
That would make sense.
Perfectly established because they say that because apparently you can transport your avatar if you enter a different location. If you enter through the Oasis from a different location, you apparently can enter a different location because when they captured Artemis later in the film, she ends up in the prison camp.
Yeah, well,
because it's just like wow.
Well, because those type of that sort of headset like specifically located her to where all the other prisoners were.
Mm-hmm. Which is like, okay, so that's a thing. Like, they need to establish some rules. Not that they need to establish every rule of how the world works. I would have loved it if they established rules because I keep crafting myself constantly.
Yeah,
but that would have been unavoidable when you think about all the details the film had to do. So he steps out of this world, and then he has to say, okay, how do I get from one world to another? No, think about it.
Maybe he's lost the ability to go from one world to another. Or
No. In the very first 5 minutes of the film,
okay,
the character, he puts on the goggles, and his avatar is in some location. He kind of like, oh yeah, I parked myself here. Oops. Slight antics. Maybe it was a joke that didn't land. The point being is that it tells the audience subtly about something without directly pointing to it while the exposition is going on. He then accesses his interface and says, I want to go to this planet. And one of two things could happen. One, he is digitally teleported to there, and then that just explains the world. Simple enough. Or you could say he calls for a transportation. Transportation he has to pay for by coin or something like that, or some way of transporting around the world. And then he gets into his car, and then you fly by different worlds, and you see, you start off small, but when you enter the digital world, and suddenly you're seeing world, planet after planet after planet after
almost
planet.
Like it's a trailer.
And you're saying like, wait, how do people get to those planets? How do people get there? What's the interface? What's the digital code? Just like, at this point, once he put on that reality, the filmmakers forgot, oh yeah, how do you interface this system? Like, you don't even need to talk about the rest of the film. You just need to dedicate a few minutes to this. And they forgot that. That, for me, is the problem with the film. And the reason why I have a hard time enjoying it. Yeah. Your thoughts now?
for Steven Spielberg being in his 70s, like, it's, yeah, you'd be kind of concerned as like someone who's disconnected, but you know what? He had at the very least a basic understanding of like why people love all these different aspects.
It's true.
How to get it together. And he got some people who like really, were good at. I'm sure there was probably a staff of writers to like or something.
Oh, they needed
this.
They needed a nerd crew for this one.
Yeah. They might have gotten it.
No problem in that regard.
Yeah, there might have been some difficulty. Maybe there might have been different versions of how the story would play out. Maybe there was a lot of complications. This is the one that just seemed the simplest. Who knows? But, it was like I was able to focus a lot more on my second viewing, and I was able to kind of take it in. It's like, okay, I'm familiar with these characters, Parsifal and Artemis and H and all the other ones, and so it's like I like these people on a very basic level, and so now it's like, okay, now that I see where this whole thing was going, I just liked it, and there are certain things that I would like there's concepts that my first viewing I wished, like, why is there a reality at all? Why doesn't it just entirely take place in a digital world with no like connection to it?
Because we would have lost all touch with reality, and I would definitely not have liked the film if they did that.
Some ground rules, so it's like there was one anime that I was watching, I forget what it was called, but it was one that was like where it's in a fantasy setting, but it kind of goes in game logic, but it's not an actual like MMO or anything. It's just this is how the characters are. Like he starts off like as a page or something, and then it develops to like different levels. But yeah, no, it's and then there was like, why can't we just have a movie where it's about going into different movies and you see them recreating stuff? But
you could do something fun with that.
At a certain point, like
ideas within ideas.
I was way more invested with this than I was with one of Steven Spielberg's previous movies, The Adventures of Tintin. And also, here's the thing,
which in and of itself was an homage.
Yeah, not very interesting at all. But one last thing I wanted to mention is the motion capture animation in this. Now, I don't like motion capture animated movies. I think it should be something that sticks with video games. It looks too artificial. It's like animation that's trying to be reality, and it doesn't work in that regard. Now, with this movie, there's a distinction. There's the live action stuff, and then there's the motion capture stuff, which it's not supposed to look realistic, and it works a lot better. So it feels, like I'm okay with it in this case.
And that also brings me to my last point, which is the film does suffer from the uncanny valley effect, which is that if the faces look a little too human but not quite human, it does kind of take you out of the picture. And the moment I saw the faces, I was like, I know exactly what the problem is. The eyes are too big.
It's the same problem with Alita Battle Angel, which will come up sooner or later. Also,
the big problem with the uncanny valley effect is that the main character's eyes were way too big.
Also, he looked like Hope from Final Fantasy 13.
I'm not sure how to perfectly solve that problem, but they needed to go back to the drawing board and draw something not so much realistic, but less. Yeah. So I think that if you are able to absorb yourself early in the film, I think you're gonna have a pretty fun time with this film.
Yeah, totally. I've heard a lot more positive opinions.
At the very least, and I certainly enjoyed myself when watching this movie, and now I have a important reference for when I say when a film does most everything right, but it doesn't get its introduction perfectly right. Not because of script, not necessarily because of world building, because of world introduction.
Because of pacing and things like that. It needed to pace out the details that it's exposed to us.
Yep. So that'll be it for this video.
Yeah, that's it. All right. Thanks, Anthony.